when I think about what building out a good impact map is, right? So like in the example we just sort of showed this thread, it's like having a roadmap that only has one road on it. It's not actually what we're doing, but it was like, how do I introduce the notion of using a map? But it's going to be some big tree view. There's a whole bunch of connections and stuff that happen. And our process of building one out builds on the design thinking double diamond of divergence and convergence. So we explore and identify all the things that might be important. Then we sort of chew on them for a bit, right? This is our emergence phase, and we gain some insights by spending time in this big map that we built. And then we converge by making choices, because we're going to have more good ideas, more things way over on the right-hand side that are worth doing than we have capacity to do. So how do we choose, right? And that's our convergence, is to zoom in on the map and say, okay, we're going to do this part, we're going to do this part this quarter, this part next quarter, this part not at all. So that's sort of our process, right? We do discovery, exploration, and then selection. And that's how this process works. And you can circle back and keep doing it. Every time you learn more stuff, capture it, think about it, do something about it. It's sort of our pattern. There are consequences to doing impact mapping well or doing it poorly. And so there's sort of a couple of visuals. If we don't do a lot of exploration, if we say, hey, I've got this idea, somebody asked me to do the thing, what problem does it solve? Oh, it solves this one. Sorry, it solves this one, which is going to cause this behavior change, which is going to lead that outcome. Okay, good, I'm done. Right? I create a connection that looks like the thing from 2 weeks ago. The problem, you end up building what you had already assumed was the right thing to build. We didn't do any of the stuff that helps us actually align to what needs to be built. And so a failure pattern after you pursue that mapping like that, where we sort of underplay the divergence and the discovery. And then we work the rest of the stuff through just fine. We're likely to build something that nobody wants. You know, there are products that don't get adopted, there are features that don't get used. Microsoft Word was always used to always get thrown under the bus, and nobody uses more than 20% of the features, right? That it's just big bloatware kind of thing. Like that was the startup spin from 15 years ago. Now it turns out more than 80% of the features are used just by different groups of people, right? Novelists use it different than blog writers, than kids writing essays, right? So almost all of the bloat is in there for a good reason. It's just not your reason, right? It's a product that's designed to serve a bunch of different people. But still, if you underthink, you end up building something nobody wants. Or you put too much bloat into your thing, it makes it too expensive, right? All of the tech debt and issues with having too much junk in it that wasn't really needed. Those are things that happen when you don't do that enough. When you don't do the exploration side of things enough, what ends up happening is that sort of connective tissue from the things we built to the reasons we built them is not solid enough. There's a whole bunch of, I don't know, maybe that's going to work. Right? Let's just try something. There's a bunch of risk of we're placing unjustified bets, and we aren't talking about whether or not they're justified bets. We're just treating them as if they're going to happen. Right? I make assumptions. I don't use hypotheses. I don't test any of them. I just assume it's all going to work. And we end up with a situation where we build all the stuff and we go and deploy it and it doesn't work. And in the course of building all the stuff, because we didn't make good choices about how much maybe, we might put a lot of pressure on the team, but we got to get this done, and this is a deadline, here's an urgent thing, right? All of that sort of chaos, sprint by sprint, and how we work with our teams to build stuff. You know, when you're aligned to a cause, sometimes that stuff makes sense, right? You don't want it to be the general rule, but we're absolutely supportive of aligning the team towards an objective. And then when we get on the far side of it, and you're like, yeah, it didn't work. They didn't actually want that. Right? It's just sort of a long-term pain if I don't think about it. I build the whole thing out, but then I'm not thoughtful about it. That's sort of how that plays out. And then sort of that last piece of I build it out, I'm thoughtful about it, and then I don't make prioritization decisions. I just try and do it all, or I do a little bit of everything. Or you end up, you run the risk of having a collection of half-solved problems instead of solving half the problems, right? Half-solved problems don't drive any value. If there's this much value available, if I solve half the problems, I'm going to get half the value. If I have a bunch of half solutions, I'm not going to get any of the value. So not making good choices after you've laid out the impact map causes us to not deliver the outcomes, even if we deliver the outputs. And then there are no problems with doing it the right way, because it's perfect. So then the question becomes, okay, how the hell do I get started doing this stuff, right? You know, you're telling me this is a cool tool, I can see the connective tissue, kind of makes sense, but okay, now what do I got to do? There's a couple different ways to do it. One of them is to start out here with a goal. We're going to go we're going to increase customer direct purchases. Right? So we're going to go build some websites so that people just come in and reorder products that are consumables or order for the first time, and we magically figure out how to get PVBB and VCS to the right ABO. Right? We're going to go drive that increase in revenue by building a whole bunch of things. Right? So like you can start from the left and move to the right. All of us, almost all of us, maybe somebody is a little bit different, already have backlogs. We already have products and projects in flight and commitments to do some things. Right? We've got a big pile of stuff. We want to think about, well, what does that stuff get us? What's it worth? Why is it doing? Is there any way to eliminate some of the stuff? So we can talk through and sort of reverse engineer what does all of that connective tissue look like for the stuff that we're thinking about or that somebody's told us we need to do, or how do I explore it, right? You can sort of go back and forth. A good way to get started, probably the easiest way to get started for us at the product team level, right? So we'll treat the monkey mucks up top. We're like, oh, that's next move. Go do predictive analytics, right? We'll set those guys aside and say, well, like, we're here doing real stuff. Is to sort of work right from left. And so if I think about all the things we build, the problems that they're supposed to solve, the behavior changes for someone that we expect to get when we solve the problems, and the outcomes and the goals, but the outcomes that we'll realize as a business if we cause those changes by solving those problems, by building those things. And so a way to think about that is with a reflection technique called what, so what, now what. What do you want me to do? Okay, so what? What problem gets solved? And okay, well then now what? If I solve that problem, is there any change? Right, I could have, we know that there are real problems for ABOs around having too much information come at them. Right? They get a bunch of updates from their uplines, get inputs and status reports from their downlines, get new product introductions from the different product teams and different marketing. They're maintaining relationships with customers, so they've got all of those. They got all of these different communications coming in. How do you sort it out? I know a few years ago, some of the research that was done, I think in 2016, maybe a Pathfinder research program. It was, in addition to being way too much information, it was coming in a bunch of different channels, right? So there's a whole bunch of chaos. And so I might say, well, let's go solve the problem of having all this stuff in all these different channels, bring it all into one channel. Nothing changed, right? It's still too much information. I can't sort it out and figure out what to do. I mean, great, it's all in one app, but that's not helpful, right? So if we solve the problem, do I get a change? And then to what end is sort of the, okay, I make the world better for my ABO, or I make things different for my customer. How does the company benefit? You know, does it stop there? Like my ABO who just spends less time selling because they're perfectly comfortable with the level of business they have and they'd love to spend more time at home. Or do they use it to sell more in order to get to higher qualification, better bonuses, build a bigger business, spend more time prospecting for other ABOs, right? Getting the flywheel going. Those are sort of the decisions, the thought process that allows us to go from right to left. Part of why I like starting with things is it's sort of, in the Agile world, in the Agile transformation world, we talk about transparency a lot. And it's about really healthy behaviors. Some of them are, we understand our direction, we provide context, we know what we're trying to do, we share that information all the way down to the developers. The guys who are hands on keyboard have a better alignment and a sense of purpose by understanding what we're trying to accomplish. And then when they make otherwise arbitrary decisions, about how to implement something. They have a contextual awareness to discover that it isn't actually an arbitrary decision. One of those approaches is fundamentally better than the other. You know, we were talking about a user story the other day about whether we're reading information from a read-write database or from a read-only database. And how you solve that problem, whether or not you solve that problem, part of your understanding is, well, what does the load look like? What's it gonna look like? What does my future look like? One of those decision patterns makes more sense than the other. That's one thing. The other one is when you have a team that's getting too much work and getting too much work from too many places, you start to get a big pile of things that pile up. And everybody who's asking for a thing is asking for their most important thing. So you're just sort of getting pummeled with all these high priorities and may not be in a position in the organization to sort it out and be able to make the call and say, I'm taking care of Audrey, John's SOL. Sorry, Francesco, I'm just going to keep rolling with it. It's a dad joke thing. I've got a daughter, I'm allowed to do this stuff. Making it visible that there's a whole bunch of stuff in the backlog and that the reasons for it being there might not be good ones, right? When I was doing work with Dell a zillion years ago for building out Dell.com, and there was an initiative somebody came in and said, we need to put ratings and reviews on all our stuff at Dell.com. Why? Because Amazon has it. Actually a really bad idea, because you have to have, because of the way that stuff works, you have to have a particular scale in order to actually get enough responses. It's like 1 in 11,000 people who visit a page are going to buy it and review it. Right, like the math gets down to completely insane. And there's a fundamental problem. If you have a website that includes the ability to rate and review products, and you have a product that is not rated and reviewed, not good, not bad, just not reviewed, sales go down. People won't buy it because they don't want to be first. If your site doesn't have a ratings and review thing visible, they don't think about, oh, I don't want to be first. They're just like, oh yeah, this is what I want. Right, and the marketing message can take over instead of the social validation message. At that time, Dell.com didn't have the scale, like it would have killed them to turn on ratings and reviews just because Amazon has it, right? But stuff gets in our backlog for exactly that reason. Impact mapping is a tool that helps us have the conversation about whether or not it's actually going to work, whether or not we actually need it, right? Is it going to solve a problem that leads to a change, that leads to an outcome that's aligned with our goals? Maybe it is, and we totally do it. Maybe it isn't, but when we're just looking at the things, it's really hard to have that conversation. We get customer requests that come in all the time. Sometimes they're worth addressing, sometimes they're not. Sometimes people just imagine stuff. I've even seen patterns here. A lot of times when I talk about things that are bad, I'm like, at previous clients, I've seen problems. Do you guys have them? But I've been here long enough that I've seen some here too, right? There are things that are in the backlog because somebody else promised it to a third somebody else. And even once we discover, oh, well, you know, that's really not worth doing. I don't care. That's what I promised, right? Like that's a pattern. That's something we have to solve for. And I've seen eyebrows lift. So I don't want you guys to be able to do the transitive math, but right, that's a real thing that happens. Lots of ways for stuff to sort of come sideways into our backlog. We build up a big pile of things. So if those are the things we're thinking about doing, the first rationale for saying, how do I not do some of them, is to say, okay, well, so what? If we build this, what problem does it solve? Right? Like we're fundamentally getting outcome oriented. That's why our outcomes are over on the left-hand side. And instead of just chipping away at the work that's on the list until the work is done, we're doing the things that are worth doing. We've got too many good ideas, so let's discard the ones that aren't worth doing. So we start out with the question: what problem does this thing solve? Right, and that's sort of my, that's my skinny version of the discovery. What problem does this solve? The next question I would say, well, and actually this is the right time to overlay in the start of your hypothesis language. We believe if we build this thing, it will solve this problem, right? Before I write that, this is an assumption. I'm assuming if I build this thing, I solve this problem. Let's make it a hypothesis. So this is also transparency for us going back out as we do our product work. We think this will work, but let's not put it in the terms of an assumption where if it's wrong, we are wrong, but rather a hypothesis that says we might want to decide, we might want to invest to figure out if it's wrong. So we're flipping our headspace as we build this stuff out too. Then the question on the left becomes the next one. If I build this thing that I think is going to solve this problem, do I have to build other things to solve the problem? Right? Does this completely solve the problem, or is this necessary but not sufficient? I got to do this, but I've also got to, I've got to build this, but I've also got to put training out there, or I have to let my CSRs know about it, or I have to tell the ABOs to tell their ABOs to tell, whatever it is, right? There could be more than just the thing I'm going to build that's required to actually solve the problem I'm solving. The other flip side is, are there other problems that get solved by building this thing? Right? A lot of times we try and kill two birds with one stone. People pick something like, oh, well, I want to do it because it's solving this problem, but oh, the cool side effect is it solves this other problem. That's, again, sort of part of fleshing that out. Anybody bump up against this and go, wow, this doesn't feel useful yet, or I don't see how to have these kinds of conversations?
I just have one question.
Yeah.
In the second scenario where you say other things may have to be created to solve the original problem.
Right.
So those two extra things that you added below the main one, are those also coming in from the same process as the previous slide, or are we creating them on our own, not from a stakeholder?
Yeah, that's awesome. More often than not, you're creating.
Yeah.
Like this is a great question. This is like part of why you get to buyer's remorse is the people who ask for things are asking for things because in their head they have problems they're trying to solve, and they've imagined that those things solve the problem. But they're not product people, they're not product teams. They aren't in the business of solving problems, they're in the business of understanding their problems really, really well. And so by whatever mechanism they think of this thing as a solution to the problem, it gets to us and we're like, well, yeah, that helps, but by itself that's not enough. If I only build the thing, we're going to get out there and it's going to launch and it's not going to actually solve the problem. And you're like, oh yeah, I still got my problem. I'm going to put in a bug, well that wasn't in the requirements, and then like we spin up internally with finger pointing and all this mess. It's mess, it's wasted, it just sucks to have that be part of our daily thing. So this is us thinking through, just ask the question up front. My experience with teams working with guys, just like you guys and gals, I'm gender oblivious. Just asking the question, you already have enough perspective that if you pause for a beat and ask the question, you'll get the answer. And then if you're not sure about it, it's really easy to validate. And it's super inexpensive to say, hey, you asked for this thing, I think you're trying to solve this problem, is that right? Yep. Do we also need these other things? No, we don't, because whatever. Or, yeah, totally. Right? That quick conversation at this point in deciding what we're going to go do is super inexpensive. It takes very little time, comes at almost no cost. With some of the product owners I worked with last year, I said, like, look, you guys are in charge of protecting your team's time. Right? This is a precious resource. We don't want to waste their energy and effort on stuff that isn't worth doing. This quick conversation up front is super inexpensive compared to doing a demo after they built it. Saying, oh, well, I just burned a sprint's worth of capacity. I could have been doing something else. And put it in front of somebody who couldn't, ask the question well, and they're like, oh yeah, I don't need that. And even that is better than building it, getting it released, going through customization, deployment, rolling it out in markets, and then finding out, right? There's a whole bunch of cost. This is like the biggest bang for the buck. It's just crazy. You just avoid missing things and you avoid doing things that don't need to be done. Which pops up into the next question. So our hypothesis language, we believe if we build this thing, it'll solve this problem. But we actually know we need it to be a little bit more, right? Solve this problem resulting in a behavior change. I don't want to solve problems that, yeah, it's a problem, but nothing's different, right? My ABO is less confused. They spend just as much time. They're not any more effective. They're just less confused. Less confused might be a really important thing to do because it makes it easier for them to prospect and bring in new ABOs, right? Like, so every example I make, there's like a flip side for like, here's why it could be important. but let's make sure we understand it, right? So solving the problem leads to behavior change, which then opens the door to the next couple questions. If I solve that problem, do I really get the change, or are there other problems I have to solve? In the product strategy world, we talk about the problem hiding behind the problem, right? And this is a pattern we see teams do a lot if you don't do enough build out of the impact map. Find the thing, solves a problem, causes a behavior change, or I believe it's going to cause a behavior change, which would lead to the outcome, and I'm all good, and let's go and run with it. And we build it, and we deploy it, and they're like, yeah, you solved that problem, but here's this other problem I still can't change, right? Even if we throw this at ourselves, we think about teaching product folks how to do this. It solves the problem of not being able to connect the things in the backlog with the outcomes and then discard the things that aren't connected. But once we solve that, we're not completely done. We also have to deal with the rest of the organization, right? Like we're starting out in this sort of order giver, order taker mode. Building an impact map lets you stop being an order taker, right? It lets you become a collaborator. But I still have to solve the problem of people who really like giving orders, right? I have to, in order to unlock the value, right? So again, ask the question, right? Walk through the gaming, do some journey mapping. There's different techniques we use to identify or validate. These are the problems we have to solve to get the change we're trying to do. There could be more than I was thinking of. And then when people are asking for things, right, they're already not talking about problems. So some of these problems we deduced from conversation with them. Some of them we discovered during or after conversation with them. Then we have to work through and say, what else do I have to do? I talk about completeness and correctness as sort of a frame of analysis for product folks. It's easy, in air quotes, to look at the requirements for something and say, this is correct. This user story is correct. As a user, I need to do this thing so I can achieve that goal. Here are my acceptance criteria. Yep, spot on. That thing is great. Here's the feature I've got to go build to make that possible. Here are the acceptance criteria. This design will enable that. Spot on, great. Here is my epic. Here's, I can look at the thing and make sure it's good, make sure it's correct. But how do I look at a thing and make sure it's complete? Completeness isn't this thing; it's these collection of things. Right? I can look at a row in a spreadsheet and fix all the mistakes in that line, but I can't look across all the lines in the spreadsheet and say I've got all the right things in the spreadsheet. Right? This is creating this connection gives me a way to say to be more effective at discovering things that I'm not thinking about. Right? It's not perfect, but it's the best tool I know of for solving the completeness problem. I've got a backlog. I finished all the stuff in my backlog. Did I succeed? I don't know, maybe. If I said I've got a problem I'm trying to solve and I just kept building until it was solved, I might not be able to say how much building I have to do, but I can absolutely say whether or not I achieved my outcome, whether or not I solved the problem. And then we have the same sort of thing. If I solve this problem, are there other behavior changes that we cause? Right? What else is different once I solve this problem? When we start talking about behavior changes, we very quickly move into, well, behavior change for whom? Right? And so, who is my actor? I believe it's behavior change, and I say, well, who is it for? But then it opens the question, well, is there somebody else who's also going to change their behavior? Right, if I'm going to build an LOS tool and I'm focusing on changing a Platinum's behavior, am I also going to change Diamond's behavior? Maybe. Right? What about Emerald? Right? Diamond and Emerald, I might be able to lump, depending on what problem I'm trying to solve, I might be able to lump them together into the same persona. Right? Remember, but personas are not just who I am, but it's also my context and usage. Right? So thinking about that stuff, then it starts to get weird. Now it's not looking like a tree anymore. It's starting to look like a graph. But it shouldn't. It actually still needs to be a tree, because you have to swing back and ask that next question. If I'm causing the same behavior change for two different people, one of them I discovered because I have to solve these problems to get that behavior change, and now I've identified a second person, I need to circle back and say, well, are there any additional problems I have to solve for that person to cause the behavior change that I didn't have to solve for the first person? So I would actually just copy and paste. Right? I would duplicate this behavior change for this other person. The other reason that ends up getting really useful to break them out as two separate trees is I might get 90% of my benefit by changing the behavior for this person and only 10% for this person. I've got too much stuff way over here, right? So that gives me a mechanism to remove some of it from the backlog. Right? Think about when we're just in a conversation around things and people are like, well, I got to build this, and we try and negotiate and agree on acceptance criteria. Well, it's got to do this for these people, and this for those people, and this for these other people. And all of these are non-negotiable, right? So the thing gets bigger and bigger and bigger because abstractly, it has to cause behavior change for all of those people on the left. If I build it out like this, and then I keep going, which we will on the next slide, then we can have a conversation that says, well, we're only going to solve for this one and not that one. Or we're going to solve for this one first and that one second. You know, or maybe we go for the small one first because this is kind of a risky thing and we don't want to spoil the market. Like, in customer-facing product teams, that's often a concern for marketing people. Of, you know, we talk about MVPs and getting stuff out in the market early. Like, well, I don't want to embarrass the company. I don't want to ruin our brand name. So how do I manage the surface area of that risk? Maybe I pick a really small footprint to start with because I don't know what the right way to solve the problem is, and I'm going to use them to validate and test stuff and experiment and try different ways to do it. Build different things that I think will solve the same problems. Right? I can go manage that exploration. If I split out the different actors, that gives me a way to split that out. It gives me a way to make one story that's giant into 2 stories or 5 stories that are all manageable in size. How many of you guys have done story slicing to say, I've got a user story, the team said it's 60 points in Fibonacci and our velocity is 30, so we've got to split it up. Like, we can't take a whole month for the entire team to build this thing, we've got to make it smaller. This is, yeah, it's almost like we cut our teeth. It's a rite of passage to start figuring out how to do that. And you can either split things up arbitrarily, like here's half the work, here's half the work, here's half the work. Thirds of work? Here's a third, a third, a third. And I don't deliver any value, and nobody can use it until I finish the third third. Because I did all the platform stuff, and then I did all the middleware stuff, and then I did the UI stuff. Or whatever sequence, but it's not usable until it's all done. But if I could tease out and say, well, some of the acceptance criteria are to support solving this problem for this person, and some of them are for solving it for this other person. I could solve for one person, cut the work in half, and get something out in market right now that's driving half of the value, and not all the value until I finish the second thing, but I start getting value right away, I start getting learning right away, I start getting feedback right away. So the context and the awareness of this perspective, even if I'm not eliminating work from my backlog, I mean, like, I keep hammering on that because that's like the quickest win. You can just rip tons of stuff out of your backlog because there's tons of stuff that never should have gotten in the backlog in the first place. We just don't know which stuff. But it also helps me manage the flow of work and slice things up and do the same work in a way that starts delivering value earlier, starts delivering learning earlier, allows me to course correct earlier, and then ultimately deliver more value by building the same stuff, by building it differently because I learned that it needed to be different. I'm going to inhale for a second. Does anybody have any questions? I know I'm just going. So my last thing is getting to the outcomes, right? If we cause this behavior change, so for the folks who were in the intro training, we had the first hypothesis, which I talked about. We believe building this thing solves this problem, causes this behavior change. Then there's the second assumption or hypothesis, so that we can manage it. We believe getting this behavior change for this person will lead to this outcome. We believe making ABOs more effective at selling is going to lead to more revenue. We believe that making it less confusing with communication is going to lead to better prospecting and growing their businesses. We believe doing this is going to lead to higher levels of qualification, more selling effectiveness, greater revenue, better market exposure. All of those drivers are things that we might believe. And it also pops us up into that next question. Okay, if I really need to achieve the outcome, what other behavior changes do I need? Right? I make the ABO more effective. what else do I have to do so that they just don't spend more time with their families? They're selfish jerks, right? How do I make sure they stay on the thing? How do I change my compensation model? How do I change my coaching practices? How do I give their uplines visibility into where a nudge or a conversation is going to make somebody more effective? What other behavior changes do I have to have happen to realize my outcome? Okay, and this is, I talked at the beginning about, you can go right to left or left to right. I identify those extra behavior changes. So now I'm going right to left and saying, okay, well, what problems do we have to solve to either cause or enable those behavior changes? Okay, if we've got to go solve those problems, what might we go build to solve those problems, right? So now we're even introducing even more stuff into our backlog. But that's all exploration of things we might do. It also gives us, now we have a super healthy conversation, a bit of a feedback loop. If somebody said, I have this outcome, go build me this thing, right? This is what I'm trying to achieve, and they haven't connected it. This is in the order giver, order taker mode. I don't see why you can't do that. That's so simple. You're like, but look, in order to solve the problem that I have to solve to get the value you're imagining, I have to build these other things. And I have to get not only the behavior change that you imagined, I have to get somebody else to change their behavior too, which means more problems have to be solved, which means more things. It's not just build the one thing, it's build all this stuff. And maybe it's not worth doing, right? You're looking at a $100,000 a month benefit, and you're talking about a $10 million spend. That's not the bet we're going to place. Right? We want to place a bet where $100,000 in spend is going to drive $10 million in revenue. Right? We got a giant organization. If we find the leverage point, if we find the fulcrum, we find the right thing to poke at, a targeted investment can have huge impact. If we don't find the thing, we could do giant investments that have no impact at all. Right? So this is a tool to help us broker those conversations, help us discover for ourselves. And I think I was at a stopping point, but I had a couple more slides. So I apologize, my brain got derailed. I'm in context switching hell today, just to set expectations. The next level of clarifying this stuff, right? So everything leading up to here helps me build out a good version of impact map, right? It's that sort of connective tissue of a cause and effect. And I could look at this impact map and go, all of this stuff makes sense. Let's go do it. But what I don't know is where the bang for the buck is, if the ROI is there, right? I could be looking at a really expensive thing, a whole bunch of people for a whole lot of time, for a really tiny outcome, right? And this view doesn't tell me that. Until I try and put some numbers on it, it doesn't tell me any of that. And so one of the questions I have to ask is, if I'm going to get this behavior change, to what degree do I need to solve the problem? Right? Problems aren't always just Boolean, it's broken, it's fixed. It could be the product pages take too long to load. Right? Like we know when we're shopping, I'm not going to wait a minute for a page to load. I'm just going to go to a different website or buy a different thing. Right? Or maybe even give up and drive to Home Depot. So I'm like, okay, a minute's too long. Do I need it to be 1/10 of a second? Probably not. How many of the universe of people, if there's 100,000 people who abandon in a minute, if I get it down to 10 seconds, am I at 90,000 people abandon and 10,000 will stick around? Okay, cool, right? There's some amount of value from just getting it to 10 seconds. How much more value do I get by getting it to 3 seconds or to 1 second? If it's stuck at 10 seconds, how much value do I get by putting a spinner in the page? So research tells us that if you're waiting a long time and you show a spinner, people don't feel like your page is slow, they feel like it's doing work. Just that little headspace. Fewer people will abandon the page just because I changed the mouse to a spinner. Right, we do the research to figure those things out, but it's the conversation around what's the degree to which I have to solve this problem that's going to lead to behavior change. Right, and then that same pattern sort of, well, before I move on to the pattern, what I go choose to build is a function of how much of the problem I'm trying to solve. Right? If I don't have that quantified conversation, I start out with the assumption of, oh, I'm trying to solve that problem, and how much work is that going to be? So your tech lead or your development team is doing an estimate. what do you think they're imagining? Right? Are they imagining completely solving that problem, getting it down to 1/10 of a second? And here's the giant pile of work to do that? Or are they assuming, well, I'll just get it to 10 seconds, because 10 seconds would be enough for me. I'm willing to wait, right? I'm always multitasking, and I'm playing with my kid, right? If it takes 30 seconds, I'm still fine, but maybe other people want 10 seconds. And so they estimate some small thing to get you to 10 seconds. If I don't know what the bogey is, I don't know what my target should be either. So sort of quantify that. Then ask that next question of, okay, if I solve the problem to that degree, if I get it down to 3 seconds, for how many people is the behavior changing? To what degree am I getting that behavior change? If I'm thinking about making something easier to do so that somebody does it more frequently, how much more frequently? Right? It's sort of quantifying these pieces along the way, which sets the context for defining acceptance criteria. Right? Does it need to be 3 seconds? Does it need to be 1 second? Like I've laid out a plan that says, here's what the outcome's worth if I can get all 100,000 people to stick around. Here's what the outcome's worth if I can get 10,000 people to stick around. My acceptance criteria for how I build the thing is a function of how much of the problem I'm trying to solve, which is a function of how much of behavior change I'm trying to get, which is a function of how much of the outcome I'm trying to get. And there's 2 ways that conversation can go. One of them is, here's how far we need to go. We need to increase sales by 9%. Figure out how much behavior change you have to get. If I was, let's say we had a bogey of, we're trying to increase verified customer sales by 10% next year. And the way we're going to do it is by getting a 5% increase in sales by ABOs and a 20% increase of direct purchases from previous customers. Right? And combined, 5% from here and 20% from here adds up to 10%, or whatever those numbers are. My marching orders for how do I make commerce better, how do I make the ABO and account management tools better, are very, very different if you tell me 5 and 20 than if you don't tell me anything, or if you tell me 20 and 5. Right? I'm going to build different backlogs and build different budgets, stand up different teams. If you don't tell me any of that stuff, right, that's kind of a problem. I can't go right to left. But if you tell me something, then I can go right from left and be super intentional and say, I don't have enough stuff here. Let me go discover more things I need to do. Or I've got more stuff than I need. Let me pick which ones I should do. I can come back the other way. So let's say somebody says, you're selling more stuff. I can come back the other way and say, okay, if I'm selling more stuff, I need these people to change. I got to solve these problems. These are the things I would build. I'm going to try and estimate how much effort it takes to build the thing, what my acceptance criteria are on. Right now, the way I just explained it, that's kind of a catch-22. I kind of can't do that, right? I don't know how much I need to build, or how good it needs to be, or what it needs to be exactly, without knowing what problem I'm trying to solve. So let's flip around the other way and say, if I built it like this, if I built these things with these acceptance criteria, here's what I predict about problem solving. Here's what I would expect, assuming I built this. Assuming I solve that problem to that degree, here's what I would expect in behavior change. If I get that kind of behavior change, here is the business math of what the outcome would be. Like, the things we plan to build, we think will move the bar 1%, right? That's when we come at it this way. Like, even if somebody doesn't tell us how far we have to go, we absolutely have the ability, and the onus is on us to say, if we build this thing, here's what we think it's worth. So we can come back and say, that thing is my whole team for 2 months. So we have some rough notion of what that costs, right? And we come back up and say, and we think if we do it, based on our understanding of the market and everything else, the research we've done today, that's going to drive something like $2 million in benefit. So we've got a cost-benefit prediction. And the people over here making the decisions who didn't tell us we need to save $2 million, they'll say, oh yeah, that looks great, go for it. Or, it's going to take 2 months of team time? No, we've got something else in the hopper that we think is about 2 months of time that's worth $10 million, do that instead. Because maybe what we plan to do would have saved 20, and then totally say go for it. Right, so we're empowering those people to make trade-off decisions. we're enabling ourselves to have this collaboration discussion that says, here are the choices, right? Here's the reality of our capacity and our team's capability. Here are things that we understand well enough to build. Here's how confident we are or not that it's gonna work, right? Sometimes we're just guessing, going from right to left. Like, I don't know, maybe it'll work. Let's try something. Or, you know what, I've seen it work in this other situation. Or we did prototypes and we got feedback, we got research. Or we actually ran an experiment. We did a Wizard of Oz version where we built out a call sheet that said, these are the people in your customer base who are most likely to buy right now, call them first. You know, we had a team manually figure that out and we put it in an email and sent it to them. But you know what, it works. Let's go build it for real. Right? There's different reasons for confidence for all of these different hypotheses of building the thing solves a problem, solving the problem causes behavior change, leads to an outcome. Right? We now have a way to manage the risk, manage the investment, manage the collaboration. Right? That's all the things we can do with this tool. Then the reference slides, so we'll share the deck, are just like printouts. If I'm going left to right, here's the divergence questions or right sort of scorecard. And I'm not gonna read through this. We don't have time, and it would be way too boring. Here's the things that you do to sort of explore the space, and then converge and make selections when you're going left to right. And then same thing when you're going right to left. How do you build it out? How do you explore it? How do you make choices? And I'm being multilingual today, so I am